So I'd love to get going. My name is Andrea. I'm your moderator and host this evening. With me, I have Dr. Gomez, who will be introducing himself momentarily. And we make up a very small part of the Inspira Advantage team. Tonight's topic, tonight's discussion is a free MCAT workshop. It's all about Chem Phys. Just before we go into the nitty-gritty and tonight's presentation, we do have a couple of housekeeping rules, so to speak. First and foremost, this webinar is recorded, and what that means is you will receive a recording in your inbox within a day or two. We're also looking, where can we find the recording of this meeting? You will get it in your inbox. Absolutely, that's always the number one question we get. So yes, you're at work. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us while you're at work. But if you do need to pop away, no problem whatsoever. We'll make sure you get a recording and some notes, as well as some really awesome resources as well. We're looking at running this webinar for about an hour. So what are we talking about? What is the point? What are you learning? So we'll be able to speak about how to tackle each MCAT question, optimizing your MCAT study schedule, expert advice from an MCAT expert who will be introducing themselves momentarily. We'll be going over live questions as well as a live Q&A towards the end. So we always love doing that. We want to give you an opportunity to get your questions answered, whether it's about the MCAT, whether it's about the admissions process. We want to make sure that we are here to support you and provide you a platform to get your questions answered. Dr. Gomez, do you want to, or Dr. Jason Gomez, I should say, do you want to introduce yourself before I introduce Inspira a little bit?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Jason Gomez, and I was a Harvard undergrad, graduated from Stanford Medicine, and am a director of advising at Inspira. So I've coached hundreds of students through this journey, both on the admissions counseling side. I had served on the Stanford Med Admissions Committee, and I also do MCAT tutoring. So today we're going to dive into the Chem and Phys section of the MCAT. It's a section that often intimidates students, but with the right approach, it is truly manageable. And so you'll walk away learning how to break down some MCAT style questions today, how to optimize your study approach for this section, and get expert level strategies to think like that 520 plus scorer.
Amazing. Perfect. Oh, perfect. We seem to be missing a slide in here. Just before we pass it off into the nitty-gritty of tonight's presentation, I just want to take a quick moment to introduce who we are. Because there is a lot of new faces in the crowd and you might not know who Inspira Advantage is. So as mentioned, we're Inspira Advantage. We're a globally recognized admissions consulting and test prep firm with over 16 years of experience. We specialize in helping students gain admission to top graduate healthcare programs, from medical to residency, dental, veterinary, and PA school with a 98% acceptance rate, something we're very proud of. We believe in starting early, which is why we offer something called pre-health advising for college freshmen. Our team helps students build a tailored academic timeline, including course selection and GPA strategy, find impactful experiences like research, shadowing, clinical and non-clinical volunteering, extracurriculars, and leadership roles. And then we help create a strong standout profile and make your undergraduate experiences check all the boxes that top medical schools are actually looking for. Now, these lay a strong foundation to differentiate applicants and make them leave a lasting impression. In addition, our MCAT tutors provide personal test prep for the MCAT, GAT, and then we have GRE tutors as well. We begin with diagnostic tests, custom study plans, and interim progress tracking. Students then do see a score increase on average of 15 points on the MCAT. And then we even have score guarantees with our 48-hour and our 60-hour program. So the score guarantee for the MCAT is 515. So when all of this is done and it's time to apply, we have something called an all-inclusive application program. What this does is it offers unlimited support through the entire application cycle. So this includes crafting a personalized narrative and school list, perfecting personal statements and secondaries essays with unlimited edits, providing interview prep, scholarship guidance, and then waitlist strategy as well. So as you can see, we're very much by our student side until they receive their acceptance. Our goal is very clear. It's very simple. It's to create the most competitive candidates and applications, ensuring our students shine in this competitive admissions landscape. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about us, we do offer free personalized consultations via video, phone, or email. No matter where you are in the application process, we're here to support you, we're here to help you, and we want to be part of this journey with you. With that being said, I'd love to pass it off right back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So again, today's session is focused on mastering the chemistry and physics MCAT questions. It's really to understand MCAT question design. So, the MCAT isn't just about memorizing formulas. It's really about thinking like a scientist. Every question's a puzzle to test how you apply concepts in novel situations. And so our goal today is to understand how to apply concepts in that logical problem-solving framework. And of course, the science of answering quickly and accurately, recognizing that there are specific question patterns, ways to eliminate wrong answers, to really manage your time effectively on the test day. Next slide, please. And so again, the chemistry and physics questions on the MCAT are all about decoding. So there, are three main question types. There's going to be calculation based. This is going to be plug and chug, but efficiently. You don't need to be completely accurate to get the exact number. Rounding is going to be your friend so that you can choose the answer that's closest to the number you calculated. There's conceptual reasoning. Does this idea make sense? And of course, there's going to be experimental analysis. Can you interpret a graph or a design or a figure? And high scorers are going to immediately recognize which category a question falls into, and that's going to dictate the strategy that you take. So again, it's not just about memorizing formulas, it's about doing a lot of practice problems, seeing how you apply those formulas, and really understanding what these question stems are asking you to do in all of these different types of questions. And so categorizing is a great way as you train your brain to recognize patterns, to see the question behind the question, and make it easier both to be a smarter test taker and also as you're studying and learning from the questions that you got incorrect or correct. Next slide, please. And there's a hidden logic behind all standardized testing, and the MCAT is no exception. The wrong answers are not random. They are strategically wrong, and they're to trap students who make common mistakes. So this can be things like flipping a ratio, ignoring units, misreading a graph, rounding errors. It could also be, the way they frame a question. Sometimes if you're speed reading, you think they're asking you, you miss a not or an incorrect, and you choose the correct answer. And so it's going to be important to recognize these patterns so that you can eliminate answers before you even start doing any calculations or any math, which will be critical for this part of the exam. So how do you approach that and to solve problems like a high scorer? The best way to save time is going to be estimate. If a question asks which of these is closest to, don't pull out your calculator, round up, and use logic, right? A 5.5, you can round to a 5. An 8, you can round up to a 10. And remember, some questions don't require math at all. You can recognize questions that are testing more conceptual reasoning, and that can help you, reach the answer much more efficiently because, again, this is a time test and you want to get through, the problems as efficiently as possible so you have time on the questions where you do need, to use calculations. Next slide, please.
So I want to do a really quick check-in because there's already some questions about contact information and sort of mentorship and tutoring and that process. So I think that is a perfect place to let you know that for anybody who is interested in mentorship, tutoring, even on the admission side, we're offering a 10% off discount for anybody joining us on this webinar with the code 10OFFWEB. And really the best way to get in touch with us is to book a free consultation. It's 20 minutes. It's just a conversation between yourself and one of our amazing colleagues who will be able to sort of direct you, get your questions answered, and figure out what is the best course of action for you and what makes sense for you and your journey right now, no matter where you are within the application cycle. So we definitely recommend you take advantage of that. You will also receive a link to book a one-on-one in the recording as well. So I want to throw that out there.
Great. So here's your game plan for test day on the chemistry and physics section. Start with the passage to anchor your understanding, not the question. You really want to understand the context first to prevent any misinterpretation and to identify relevant information faster. Sometimes the question will say, based on the passage and the figure, which of these is true, or test your comprehension in that sense or your application. You want to identify the equation you'll use before doing any math to avoid unnecessary calculations and really pinpointing the correct formulas you want to use up front. And of course, you want to check units to catch mistakes, converting units early to avoid sneaking into any unit traps. You'd be surprised how many questions can be solved just by noticing a unit mismatch in the answer as well. And so again, the best way to get a practice on this is to be doing practice questions to see, which units go with which equations so that you get into the pattern of immediately recognizing those issues. Next slide, please. So what are the common pitfalls? A lot of students are over memorizing. They think the MCAT is just about memorizing every single fact you can from every test prep book. But really, MCAT is about application. There is recall, but it's not only recall. You really want to understand why formula works. Many questions will be experimental setups that focus on trends, understanding relationships, whether it's in a figure or whether it's in experiments that they show you, not just numbers. You also want to pay attention to any control variables and understand what is actually being tested and what you can logically conclude from the experiment. And then when interpreting experiments, focus on the trend. What increases, what decreases, what's the control? Is it an inverse relationship? Is it a direct relationship? The goal is really, can you think like a lab scientist, not necessarily a trivia savant? And again, you want to practice applying concepts in different contexts to build adaptability, because there are many different questions that are testing the same concept. And so again, doing practice problems will help you understand when the test writers want you to use a certain equation, when they are testing a specific relationship in an experiment to a control, for example. Next slide, please. Of course, the MCAT is a time test. It would be much easier if you had all the time in the world to, really focus on every question. But when you think about it, you have 90 seconds per question. If a question is taking up time, move on. You can always come back to it, and you want to prioritize high yields, easy wins. A perfect test taker, even a test taker who was wanting to get 515 plus, doesn't get every question right. Your goal is to maximize the points per minute that you're getting on this exam. And so you can always come back, you can always flag questions. Don't let a question take up 5 minutes, 10 minutes when you're sitting on any of the sections, but particularly in the chemistry and physics one. Next slide. So this is your toolkit for success. You want to identify equations, units, and variables before starting any calculations. You want to sketch diagrams, especially with complex reaction pathways, to simplify problems or in any physics problems. Convert units as you go to catch errors and confirm consistency. And of course, when you take a practice exam, it's really a diagnostic tool, but you want to simulate timing in your practice. Don't review at your own pace. Try to answer questions within the 90 seconds that you'll have on the MCAT exam. Next slide, please. So, how do you understand what they're trying to test you on, the test question writer's intent? Every MCAT question is going to test a specific cognitive skill. So one helpful exercise to ask yourself as you're starting to do practice questions, as you're reviewing, a practice exam you've done is, what skill are they probing here? Is it proportional reasoning? Is it a graph or experiment interpretation? Is it units? Every question is designed to test one of those skills, which will be valuable when you're a physician. You want to recognize common distractors. Distractors will tempt you with answers that, again, are plausible. These are strategically incorrect, but they are wrong answers. So imagine things that reverse cause and effect logic, or things that conflate correlation as causation, or rounding incorrectly. And so you want to make sure that you catch those and that you don't fall for those traps. And of course, leveraging scientific intuition. So if you're stuck, eliminate any unlikely choices based on trends, proportions, fundamental principles that you studied, or incorrect units, for example. Next slide, please. So how do you optimize your approach for this section? Here's the truth. 80% of chemistry and physics questions are going to pull from around 20% of topics. So focus on foundational topics like kinematics, electrochemistry, thermodynamics. They appear frequently on the MCAT. They also appear, quite frequently in all of the practice questions, etc. So that's going to be helpful. You also want to use a complementary strategy between active and passive learning techniques. So again, active is going to be practice problems and questions that you're doing in a time setting. It's going to be flashcards like Anki, right? That's quite popular. And then passive is more videos or reading techniques. And of course, you want to favor active review for longer term gains. So when you're reviewing questions, you want to review, but of course, the ones you got incorrect, really understand, was this I read the question incorrectly, I missed a key, piece of the passage, or is it fundamentally, oh, I thought I understood this topic, but I really don't, so I'm going to go back and review it, and then do some more practice questions related to that topic you got incorrect. It's a good way to reinforce it, so you're reviewing that material. And then you also want to review the questions you did get correctly to see, did you get correctly because you guessed correctly, because you were able to use your intuition and eliminate wrong answers correctly, or did you truly understand the concept and you feel like you've mastered it? And then you can spend, don't ignore your strengths, but you can spend a little less time as you're trying to ramp up the areas where you need some more studying. Next slide, please. So how do you build long-term retention, especially for this section? Again, the MCAT is not just a memory exam or testing your recall, but you will need to recall certain information. So what to actually remember when you study. Again, use spaced repetition to reinforce difficult concepts over time. So flashcards work great here. You want to prioritize actively solving problems over reading about equations or doing something passive to get a deeper understanding. And you want to do that in different contexts. Don't memorize, an equation in a specific problem or in isolation. See other types of questions that to get to the right answer, you had to use the same equation or you had to apply the same concept. That is when you're going to start seeing the patterns and recognizing them on your test day. And of course, apply equations in different scenarios, solve problems actively. Passive reading feels good, but it doesn't help build recall under pressure. And so one of the biggest pieces that I encourage my students when I'm tutoring them is, great, you got this question wrong because you didn't understand the concepts. Go read up about it. Passive learning is still helpful for a review, whether it's videos or reading a chapter in your test prep review, but then test that. So go do questions specifically targeting those concepts or the questions at the end of that chapter and see if you've actually retained and can apply and adapt what you couldn't originally. Next slide, please. Great. So we've now reached the part of the session where we can review some questions and solutions together. We'll be walking through 3 practice questions, and I'll give you a detailed MCAT style explanation as if I were teaching live during a workshop. The questions I've chosen are discrete, meaning there's no associated passage. You will get some discrete questions on the MCAT exam, but of course, the majority of these will be passage-based, and we have more resources for you if you do decide to work with Inspira or one of our MCAT tutors. So the first question, you have 40 grams of ammonium nitrate that's heated, and they're asking you to calculate how many grams of dinitrogen monoxide and water vapor will be produced, and they do give you the molar masses and some different answer choices. So here's how you solve a question like this, like a high scorer. So the first is to recognize the type of question that this is. It's a stoichiometry problem. And so you want to know what the balanced reaction is first. So we know that, ammonium nitrate is going to be heated as a reactant. And so the products are going to be, water vapor and dinitrogen monoxide. And so the first step would be to write out that equation and then see what needs to be balanced. So if you were just to write out the ammonium nitrate as the product or reactant and the products of dinitrogen monoxide and water vapor, you would see that there's more oxygen on the left side of the equation. And so the balanced equation, you actually need 2 water molecules to balance the equation. Then once the equation is balanced, you want to convert to moles. And we can go to the next slide. I think I pasted the solution here too. Perfect. Then you'll want to convert to moles. So we're given 40 grams of ammonium nitrate and told that its molar mass is 80 grams per mole. In order to calculate, the number of moles that we have, you will take the 40 grams and you divide by 80 grams. So you will get 0.5 mole of your reactant or the ammonium nitrate. And now we can use the balanced equation. So 1 mole of ammonium nitrate will yield 1 mole of dinitrogen monoxide, and 1 mole of ammonium nitrate will yield 2 moles of water. And we know that we started with 0.5. So now we just have to convert to grams. So for the dinitrogen monoxide, we know it's 44 grams per mole, or 44 grams. So we multiply that by 0.5 mole, you get 22 grams. And then for the water, again, 1 mole of the the ammonium nitrate will yield 2 moles of water. And so you will have 1 mole times 18 grams, or 18 grams of water. So that will give you the correct answer, which was B. The other choices, if we go back 1 slide. So here are the traps. In A, they halved the dinitrogen monoxide, but doubled the water. So that's, again, the inversion of, what you're supposed to do in the balanced equation. C, you see the correct, dinitrogen monoxide, but incorrect water. They used 2 moles instead of 1. And D doubled the moles of the, the dinitrogen monoxide. You can go on to our next question. The MCAT loves testing rate laws based on mechanism and not necessarily overall reaction. So in this question, we can see a reaction with 2 elementary steps. The first step, you can see is a fast step from A2 to 2A. And then the second step is a slow step where the reactants A plus B lead to a product of AB. And it's asking you to identify the correct rate law. Now, if you remember from your studies, only the slow step determines the rate law. And so that'll be step 2. So again, the rate will be proportional to the concentration of A times the concentration of B. but A is an intermediate, and you cannot write intermediates into the rate law. So you need to eliminate A using step 1, the fast step. And there is the rule of equilibrium. So if, A2 converts to 2A in a fast step, that means the concentration of A is proportional to the concentration of A2 times 1/2. But since 2A is produced, then it's twice the concentration of A2. And so when we look at this question, the rate will be equal to K, the constant, times the concentration of A2 times the concentration of B. Answer choice B here ignores B entirely and only uses one reactant, so it's incomplete. Answer choice C squares A2, and it overcorrects from the 2A product. And answer choice D leaves A as an intermediate in the rate law, which is not allowed. So even before doing any of the calculations, you could have eliminated B and D immediately. And if you go to the next slide, you can see the explanation here as well. And you can see where they substituted the A for the 2 times the A2. And we can go on to our next question. So in this question, D-glucose is dissolved in water and undergoes mutarotation, a process in which it interconverts between its alpha and beta anomers. The solution reaches equilibrium at 25 degrees Celsius, wherein the final solution is 36% alpha D-glucose. The specific rotation of pure alpha D-glucose is plus 112 degrees, and that of pure beta D-glucose is plus 19 degrees. What is the specific rotation of the equilibrium mixture of D-glucose at 25 degrees? So again, this is a weighted average question. This will be common on the MCAT, particularly when dealing with mixtures. And this is an instance where, it might be helpful for you to round, right? 36% is very close to 40. And so what you'll do here is to calculate the different percentages in the mixture. So if it's 36%, then the other percentage of the pure beta D-glucose will be 64, or you can do a 40-60 split here if you're rounding. And then they give you the, of course, specific rotation of each. So then you take the 0.4 times the 112, add it to the 0.6 times the 19, and you will get an answer choice that is closest to C, the 52.5 degrees. A, you can immediately eliminate, as you can D, because they only give you the specific rotation of pure alpha D-glucose or pure beta D-glucose rather than the mixture. And then, of course, B and C, you'll just have to calculate this and select the answer that's closest to what you rounded, or you can do the actual calculation. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that's exactly how they calculated it here. They did not round. They used a specific number to get to answer choice C, but you can get to something similar by rounding to 0.4 and 0.6. Next slide, please.
So I'd like to pop back in here because we are towards the end of our presentation, end of our workshop for today. But just before we hop into the Q&A, I know there's some really awesome questions in the chat already. We'd love to hear from you. So this QR code takes you back to a feedback form, and that feedback form really is made up of 4 or 5 different questions. We ask that you fill that out and just get back to us. We want to hear your thoughts about what we did right, areas of improvement, if there's future topics you'd like us to cover in sessions. We want to make sure that we offer that to you and that we hear from you, right? No, the session is an hour, so we'll go into the Q&A as well, Christine. But yes, we would love to hear from you, and yeah, we'll make that available. With that being said, we have some questions in the chat, which I'd love to hop into right away. So we are a little bit early on schedule. What that means is that you just get a lot more time with Dr. Gomez. So definitely get all your questions in. Again, whether it's about the MCAT, whether it's about the med school admissions process, whether you needed us to clarify something. We want to make sure that, no, you didn't join late, Christine. We want to make sure that we support you in any way we can. And you'll hear me saying that over and over and over again on these webinars. So the first question I think is really great. So Gabriella asks, what do you recommend if someone were to be stuck on an answer and they don't know which one to eliminate?
Great question. Getting stuck on the MCAT, if it's a tough question, happens to everyone. If you're unsure and don't know what to eliminate, what I would recommend is first go back to the passage, if there is one, skim for keywords or phrases in the question that connect it to a figure or specific lines in the passage. Don't reread the whole thing. Really anchor yourself in the part that's most relevant to the question you're asking. Another strategy you can use is to rephrase the question. Again, what is the question really testing? Sometimes turning it into a simpler question helps. For example, which of the following best explains could be turned into why does this happen, right? To try to see if that gets you to unblock how you're thinking about it. There's, of course, MCAT logic. We talked a lot about good test-taking strategies that you'll also hopefully pick up as you're doing more practice problems. Even if you're unsure of the science behind the question, the MCAT is designed to be logical. So you can ask, does this choice directly answer the question? Is it the best choice? Is it too extreme? The MCAT likes moderate qualified answers. So, things like always or never are typically, designed to lead you astray. And, is it outside the scope of the passage? So are they testing something that is not supported, or is the answer choice not supported by what you read in the passage? And then, of course, you can start with what you can eliminate. So again, absolutes, words like always, never, completely are usually wrong. Again, not always, but usually. Anything out of scope. If the passage never talked about what an answer mentions, it's probably wrong. And opposite, if the answer directly contradicts something in the passage, toss it. And again, 90 seconds, don't dwell on this too long, mark it, guess the one that's least wrong. If you're still unsure, based on what's most aligned with the passage, something that is least assumptive, and then you can always come back to it, but don't let a question, take more than the 90 seconds if you can.
Amazing. So the next question, tips for tackling the physics section without a calculator.
Yeah, that's a great question. So
that's a tough question.
Yeah, I would say, again, rounding is going to be helpful. But of course, memorizing key equations. So you don't need to memorize everything in the physics equations, but there are some essentials that you need to know, like force is equal to mass times acceleration, or, energy is equals, the frequency times, the wavelength, or kinetic energy is 1/2 mass times velocity squared, or potential energy is mass times, the gravitational force times, times h. So, making a cheat sheet and testing yourself, voltage is equal to current times resistance. Like, there are concepts that will constantly come up. So first, you want to make sure that you have a good understanding of that. The second I would say is, I mentioned rounding, so approximate to the best that you can. So the MCAT is designed to be done with round numbers. So, the gravitational acceleration force, for example, use 10 meters per second squared as opposed to the 9.8 that it actually is. Approximate pi as 3, approximate the square root of 2 as 1.4. Use scientific notation to simplify, 3 times 10 to the 8 for the speed of light, or the elementary charge, 1.6 times 10 to the minus 19th. And then you want to cancel units and numbers early. So do the easiest things to cancel first. So if you're doing calculations by hand, cross out anything from the numerator and denominator that you can early before plugging everything in. Don't multiply big numbers first, because that's going to take a lot of time. And so estimations are going to be your best friend since you don't have a calculator. And ballparking it, some of the answer choices will be far apart. You don't need the exact answer. And if you're stuck between close answers, that's when I would recommend doing a quick plug-in, but don't waste time doing, full long division unless you absolutely need to. Other recommendations would be just knowing the shape of common graphs or trends. You might not always need to calculate, you just need to know relationships. So anything that's an inverse, for example, you can imagine it's a hyperbola. Squares and cubes are, a curve that increases steeply. Direct relationships will always be straight lines. And so if you see a graph, you can try to figure out how that changes, even if you don't know the numbers. And then checking dimensions and units of each answer, which can help you eliminate wrong choices, right? So force, for example, it's always kilograms times, meters per second squared, or voltage is always a joule over a coulomb, or energy is kilograms times, meters squared over second squared. So really skipping the hard math and solving conceptually can also, help, right? So if a question asks you, if the radius doubles, what happens to force? You don't necessarily need to calculate that. The relationship, that force is proportional to 1 over the radius squared. So if the radius doubles, the force gets reduced by a fourth. So those type of strategies will really help you. That's not to say you won't have to do any calculations by hand, but really trying to be efficient about it.
Amazing, great questions, everyone. I know there's quite a few more, so definitely getting to as many as we can tonight. So next question. Jenny asks, what is the best way to study for the MCAT to yield the highest score?
That is a great question. As you know, the MCAT has 4 sections. And, the MCAT is 100% strategy and discipline. And so what I typically recommend is, of course, you've been taking the prerequisites, so you'll have some exposure to some of the content, but the MCAT has some content that you'll either need to refresh or that you may not have been exposed to yet or at all when you completed your prereqs. So I usually recommend content review first, so anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. You want to build a solid foundation. This is not about becoming perfect. And again, content review can be active. So flashcard to really, lock in high yield facts, not reading every line of your book. So, if you're using Kaplan or Princeton Review, a lot of these chapters will have like an end of chapter summary of here's what you should have taken away at the end of this chapter. And so really starting with those takeaways and making sure that, that's what you're internalizing versus trying to memorize every single word or how they phrase something. And, you'll want to prioritize your strengths and weaknesses. So, biology is going to be, in terms of content, the most important thing because it's mostly a lot of content. Then it'd likely be biochem, psych, chemistry and physics, some content, but it's going to be more application. And then cars, of course, you don't really need to review any content for cars. Cars is all going to be based on actually practicing with questions. So, don't get stuck there. I find that a lot of students that I've worked with in the past, when they first come to me, they've spent months reviewing and never actually practicing. And so you want to develop daily active practice early because test taking is muscle memory. So doing 30 to 60 questions a day And that could be from, the AAMC has the Q packs, UWorld, you'll come to love. You can use it for the MCAT. You'll have to use it for your boards when you are in medical school. And there are a couple other resources out there for you. And you'll want to review every single question, even the ones you got right. Again, you want to ask yourself, why was this right? Why did I get it right? Did I understand the concept? Did I guess correctly? Why were the others wrong? And what was this question or passage really testing? And for any misses, writing down lessons learned is going to be helpful. And then, of course, one of the most important pieces to this is full-length practice test. And I typically recommend 8 to 10 weeks from your test date to really starting these in full. So at this point, you should have done most of your content review, and you have been practicing, from question banks to really test your knowledge and test application. And you want to, and I can't emphasize this enough, you want to simulate the real thing under real conditions. Sit down, do the full, 8-hour block of, I'm going to take this practice test as if it's the real exam. Do not use any materials. Don't have an open book. Make sure this is timed to the, as close as you can to the real exam. And you'll want to take it, a practice exam, a full-length one, maybe every 7 days, and spend a day or two fully reviewing it, where you're tracking score trends and weaknesses. And so you want to incorporate that as well. So, reviewing your top 5 missed content of that week you're studying, your top 3 timing issues, for example, maybe strategy shifts. So, for example, if you rush through figures, slow down, or doing things like that. And then I'd say when you get to test week, it varies. At this point, you've done everything you can. Some students, I'd recommend just doing a light review only versus trying to memorize new content. Sleep, hydrate, practice your deep breathing, and being confident, because at that point, you've done the work and you can trust what you've done so far.
Amazing. So this question is about rounding. Generally, how generously can we round, would you say? Is it likely safe to round to the nearest 10 on most things instead of dealing with odd numbers or decimals?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I would say rounding is still one of the most underused MCAT hacks. You can absolutely round aggressively on most questions, but it's going to depend. So if the answer choices are far apart, for example, if it's 10, 100, 500, 1,000, you can easily round numbers and ballpark because it's testing your reasoning and not necessarily your calculator skills. If you're dealing with scientific notation, rounding helps make exponents easier to manipulate. So instead of 3.2 times 10 to the 8th, just say it's 3 times 10 to the 8th. Or instead of 1.6 times 10 to the minus 19, say it's 2 times 10 to the minus 19. Similarly with ratios, right? I think I mentioned before, if mass is, or gravitational acceleration is 9.8, round to 10 to simplify your life. The one time where I want you to be cautious when you're rounding are if the answer choices are very close together. So if it's 45, 50, 55, 60, rounding could lead you to the wrong answer. And so in that case, you want to calculate it exactly. If, there's a cancellation opportunity, keep numbers intact. And by that, I mean, if there are common terms, you want to cancel those before you round. And then if you're solving for something squared or cubed, a small rounding error gets magnified, right? Because it's x squared or it's x cubed. So that's when I would say exercise some more, be choosier when you're rounding. But I would generally round into the nearest 10th is often safe. And the MCAT wants you to round, right? It's baked into the question design. And only do more precise math when you look at the answer choices and they're very close together.
Haley said that helps a lot. Thank you.
Of course.
Absolutely. So the next question, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, is about any tips on how to better understand the passages.
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think about that for a little bit. I'd say it's quite common to misinterpret passages. It happens to everyone, especially when you're reading fast under pressure. And the key is not just about highlighting, or it's really how do you actively interrogate a passage. And so, the tips are, it's going to depend on what's causing the misinterpretation. So sometimes one common trap I see my students fall into is this idea of passive reading, which is, they're reading to really understand everything, every single word. And on the MCAT, you do not have time for that. You really want to read, more purposefully. So why is this sentence here? What is the author trying to prove or emphasize? Why is this figure here? Like, what is the relationship they're trying to get me to see in this graph, in this experiment? And how does this connect to the overall argument or not, right? It could contradict their main hypothesis. And so that'll help you filter out some of the extra details. And so, particularly in cars, what I find helpful is the what, why, how. What was this paragraph about? Why did they include it? How does it support the thesis or the main idea? You don't need to jot it down, but that's just a framework to help you stay grounded. And then, of course, especially in the science passages, you want to prioritize anything that's high yield. So that's hypotheses, assumptions, experimental design, which is what's the control, what changed, data trends. The exact numbers are not as important. Think about the trends in the relationship. Is it, in the graph? You might see like a linear relationship. You might see, many different relationships, and they're testing different compounds with a wild type or different mutations, and you want to see which had the most dramatic effect, for example. You want to understand cause and effect logic. Transitions are helpful. So, however, in contrast, surprisingly, they're trying to clue you in to something that you should be taking as a takeaway. And then, just drawing mini diagrams can help. Being alert of mental traps. So like brushing past subtle phrases like suggests does not mean prove, right? And trying to avoid assuming too much or missing shifts in an argument. So really, again, that's going to come from practice. And if you get the answer wrong, going back to the passage and looking at, okay, here are the clues they left me to lead me to the right answer, and here's why I missed them. So it's really about trying to be more purposeful when you're reading it and simulating the exam, but also in your review to go back into the passage.
Amazing. So I'd like to ask a little bit of a question regarding test day anxiety, because I know that's a question that often enough our students ask us about. Do you have any tips to sort of how to handle that test day anxiety and kind of getting into that mental mindset?
Yeah. This is why simulating a full-length practice exam is critical in your process, because it'll help you build endurance. It's a long exam, it's a long day. And so to the best of your abilities, simulate everything, the break you're going to take. You get a lunch during the MCAT. So take a lunch break when you're, taking the exam, keeping it to the time that they allow you at the testing center. Breathing, a simple breath can calm your nerves in 60 seconds or less. There's the box breathing, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, and you repeat that. You're really, going from flight or flight and getting your heart rate down, and that'll help with your anxiety, reframing your thoughts. So, you've trained for this, you've done the work, reminding yourself of that. Of course, letting yourself, you're not going to get every question right. There's going to be some questions where you feel bummed that you missed, or that, there might be a section where you feel like you did particularly unwell. You don't know that yet. And so, you have a clean slate with every section on this exam. And so try to take some breaths and reset. And then, of course, as you get closer to your test day, making sure you're waking up at the same time that you practice, so you're ready and don't sleep in, or, can't go to bed because, your sleep schedule is adjusting, wearing comfy clothes, preparing snacks, water, an extra ID, whatever you need the night before, arriving early. It's all about consistency and being able to reset.
The next question, it actually piggybacks off of this beautifully, is continuing from stimulating the test experience. Are the computers at desk level or elevated during the exam? I see people study with the screens at a particular angle and wonder if that's because the MCAT computers will be like that.
I don't think I've ever gotten that question before. I actually don't know the answer to that. I believe, I'm remembering from when I've taken these exams, you should be able to adjust the desk level monitor, but the desk itself at these testing centers is not going to be adjustable. And if you do need something like that, they might be able to accommodate, but I don't know. I'd be curious. So please email us and let us know what you find out or discover. Or if anyone, knows the answer, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, somebody says regular height in my experience. You're very welcome. Okay, this is a really great question. Do you know if you stay at the computer during the breaks or do you have to leave the room every time?
That's a great question. You do not need to leave the room. Breaks are optional. So if so I have some students who skip their breaks, except maybe a lunch, and they just want to get through the next section. But of course, the breaks are there for you to use. So, go to the bathroom, get a sip of water, take a deep breath, walk outside the testing center, and just make sure you're back in time and that you account for the security processes because, they will, there's a pat down, there's like a wand, they might check your glasses. So it's a process to come back in. And then in terms of some of these other questions related, you could set a timer. You'll probably need to go to your locker and look at a watch. They don't really allow, from what I remember, anything that beeps or anything electrical in this situation. You're muted.
I'm so sorry about that. Great question. This is something I can relate to. Another test situation question. And if we can't answer this, we're going to find out the answers and I'll make sure that we get it to you in the follow-up with this recording. But we are not allowed to have a coat, correct? I'm an absolutely freezing person. Should I plan to dress really warm?
I think, yes, be prepared. Have layers is something I'd recommend. I think it depends on the specific testing center and rules. They might not allow like a big heavy coat because they'll have to, check to make sure you don't have anything in it, basically. But like I've seen pretty large sweaters, or you can definitely wear, comfy clothing. But, you can always bring something and they do give you a locker. So they'll tell you there if you can't have it. But that's why I would recommend layers for sure.
Good question. Got it. Haha. Thank you guys. You're very welcome. So we are just about at the hour. We have time for maybe one more question. So I'll just let the audience just get in their final thoughts. Okay, great question. At our desk during the exam, what all are we allowed to have?
It's another great question. And again, they will tell you all of this information when you register. Typically, though, it's usually just you. They will give you paper or a pen or anything like that, but all of your personal belongings, like your phone, your lunch, everything else, water, all of that will typically have to be in your locker outside of the computer lab or the exam room. And again, you can access that during your break.
Amazing. Okay. So we're just about at the hour. I think this is, okay, I was just going to say, we can wrap it up, but there's this wonderful question. I think this question just is is a really great way to wrap it up. What is your greatest advice for us as we are all crafting our application and some are in gap years?
Yeah, that's a great question. My greatest advice would be own your story fully and authentically. You're not just a GPA, you're not just an MCAT score, you're not just a list of activities. You're a person with a voice, a path, a why, and that's what will make you stand out. Whether you're in a gap year or still in school, focus on why medicine. Again, avoid any cliches like I want to help people, and talk about the one rooted in your own lived experiences, the kind of doctor you want to be and why, and what parts of your journey have shaped you to get there. So that's my biggest piece of advice, having read a lot of applications for people who applied.
I feel like we need a mic drop moment because that was absolutely beautiful, absolutely spot on. With that being said, we are just at the hour. Dr. Gomez, thank you so much for being with us tonight. To our audience, thank you for being so interactive. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. If by chance you have some questions post-webinar, definitely reach out, whether it's through that one-on-one or just get back to us via email, and we'll make sure that we get those answers for you. Thank you for being with us tonight, and always check our website. We have webinars every single week. Dr. Gomez does a ton of these as well, so you'll be seeing his wonderful face again soon. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Have a good night.